Don't worry, we are friends.
GM friends, and welcome back to another episode on FRENS VALIDATOR. If this is your first video, I'm yours, Yuri Maibaum, and this show's the hub that brings together crypto pioneers, exciting projects, and a thriving community. And today I'm super pleased to have Sunny Aggarwal on the show once again, but for the very first time, we won't talk about Osmosis or MEV-related things, nothing with DeFi at all, actually. Today, we will talk about Urbit. But Sunny, first of all, thanks for being here once again.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's exciting. It's a topic I find very interesting, but don't get a chance to talk much about. People always want to have me on about osmosis and stuff, but I have other interests too.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine because today we will talk about one of these interests. So everyone knows you about as the co-founder of Osmosis, as one of the core contributors in the Cosmos ecosystem, but you are also active in the Urbit community. And today we will elaborate on the question, what the hell is Urbit? We hear it here and there from very smart people in the Cosmos. I also know that Brian, the co-founder of Chorus One and president of the Interchain Foundation, is a huge fan of Urbit. So you hear Urbit here and there. But yeah, let's do a quick introduction into Urbit. So Urbit, if you go on the website right now to basically set the groundwork here, why is Urbit saying that we need to fix the internet? Because that's the first sentence that you read on their website. So what are essentially the problems that the Urbit community wants to solve? Actually, in the white paper, or is it actually a white paper, but on the overview page, it's written by the community members. We think the internet can't be saved. The way things are going, megacorp will always control our apps and services because we can no longer run them ourselves. The only way out of this mess is with a completely new platform that's owned and controlled by its users. What are they talking about? What is like, where's Urbit coming in here?
Yeah, so I'll admit, I think one of the challenges the Urbit community faces is sometimes they are not the best at communicating what it is that they're building and why. Like, they use a lot of lofty language, but you kind of get lost in it. So I mean, yeah, maybe talk about the why, and then we can come back and talk about the what it is, right? So the why, like what are they trying to say there? Is basically that most applications that you have on the web today are very like centralized architecture, right? Like what I mean by this is like imagine a chat application, right? It's could be run as a peer-to-peer application, right? If I'm sending messages to you, why do we have to like why do I have to send my messages to a centralized server, whether it's Facebook server or WhatsApp? Oh, that's Facebook as well, I guess. And Facebook has a lot of them, but like or Telegram. Like, why do I have to send my messages to a single centralized server and they send the messages to the other people, right? Like, why can't I just send messages directly peer to peer? So the idea of Urbit is basically like, maybe not every application in the world, web app, right? But a lot of web apps could in theory be rewritten as peer-to-peer applications. So, I think messaging is the standard example that a lot of Urbit people focus on. But like another one would be like, imagine something similar to Google Docs, right? Like, why is it that Google Docs has to exist on Google's servers just for us to edit a document together, right? Like, Microsoft Word documents don't exist on someone's servers. They existed on, your computer, and you could share it with people. But like, Google Docs added some nice functionality, which is like the collaborative editing, right? Multiple people can edit that at the same time. But it's like Urbit's saying like, oh, why can't we achieve that in a peer-to-peer architecture rather than having to send all of our data to Google or any centralized operator?
Yeah, I think the more you start thinking about it, the more it makes sense. I think the messaging aspect is very obvious.
I mean, it sounds very. I mean, what I just said now that I think about it, it sounds very similar to how you pitch blockchains to people, right? It's like, oh, why am I sending my data, all the transactions to a bank when we can do this peer-to-peer? You can imagine like Urbit is basically saying like, hey, why can't we do this for more types of applications?
Yeah, I think totally makes sense. But to be fair, like the same was with blockchain. So before Satoshi Nakamoto wrote his white paper, we also didn't think that this was possible, that you could send money around without any intermediaries in between. So now Urbit comes in and say, hey, we can actually rethink that. We can remove essentially the middleman, if you want to put it like this. So very similar to crypto. So at what point do they like what is the idea so that I basically send messages back and forth without relying on a server or company or whatnot?
So I guess the question is like, how does this differ from like, that you can say that's our idea behind
WhatsApp,
Ethereum, right? Like Ethereum also like, hey, let's remove that. I would say the difference between Urbit and blockchains is blockchains still have a central coordination point, but they decentralize that coordination point, right? Like and what that is the blockchain itself. You can think of the blockchain as a decentralized server. So most Ethereum apps still follow what you can consider like a client server architecture, where you're all pushing data to a server and then pulling data from that server. But it just so happens that that server is a blockchain. Urbit is saying, no, actually, we don't need that. We don't need a single centralized server at all. Our messages can just be done as a gossip protocol at the peer-to-peer gossip layer. We don't need to have a single centralized, or not centralized. We don't need to have a single threaded source of truth like a blockchain for this.
Like more similar to a deck, right?
A what? Yeah,
more similar to a deck, right?
Yeah. So maybe let me give the analogy that I usually use to explain Urbit, because I think it is helpful
For crypto bros,
right? For crypto bros. This is for crypto bros specifically. I'll give the crypto bro version, and then I'll give like the Cosmos people version, because I think it's even easier for Cosmos people. So the crypto bro version is, okay, once upon a time, there was a project called Secure Scuttlebutt. So Secure Scuttlebutt was a decentralized social network. It still exists today. I don't know how popular it is, but it's a decentralized social network. And what it is it uses a DAG in architecture, not a blockchain. The idea is that, like, let's say I'm sending messages, or what'll happen is, let's say you and I have a connection with each other on the network, but then, every time I send a message, I'll send it to you. Every time you broadcast a message, you'll pass it on, along with passing your own messages on to your peers. You'll pass my message on to your peers as well. So what'll happen is, like, everyone is just talking to their friends, but because everyone's friends are like, not fully overlapping, messages eventually make their way throughout the entire network. So instead, what this does is you have eventual consistency, right? Let's say I say that, like, I told you one thing, and I told John something else, and Mark something else, right? And eventually, as people gossip more and more, everyone in the entire network will hear about it. What's important though is this doesn't solve the double spend problem. So the double spend problem is what Bitcoin was trying to do, which is like saying, hey, we need to very quickly find out if, like, someone, I only have 10 Bitcoin in my account. I can't send 10 Bitcoin to John and 10 Bitcoin to Mark, right? That's, I'm spending more than I have. So the Bitcoin architecture was designed to find these issues very quickly. When people send conflicting messages, you resolve them very quickly. And what that needed was, you needed everyone in the network to agree on something, like what is the canonical version, very quickly. And that's why they had to create these consensus protocols. So, but these are not very scalable. These have scalability. Like, consensus protocols have scalability limits to them. Secure Scuttlebutt said is, hey, with a social network, we don't care about solving the double spend problem. Like, what are you going to double spend? Oh, you told one person you liked a post and the other person you didn't like a post. It's like, okay, yeah, like, you sent a conflicting message, but it's like not the end of the world, right? What will happen if you send a conflicting message? Okay, your reputation score just goes down because you're like being a bad actor at the network. But like, it's not like you're not creating money out of thin air or anything. So in a social network, solving the double spend isn't as important. What's more important is solving the scalability. And so that's why this like architecture of a DAG-based system was designed. Okay. And so it was meant to be a social network, and it's running and stuff. Let's put secure scuttlebutt on the side for now. So I hope everyone gets an idea of understands what this DAG network is. Okay. Let's go back to Bitcoin for a second. Bitcoin, also wanted to solve a problem, which is this money system. And they created this new decentralized data structure called a blockchain to solve that. Ethereum comes along and looks at Bitcoin and says, oh, that's a very interesting decentralized data structure. What if we put a generalized VM on top of it? So now you take that same data structure, instead of just using it for a specific application, Bitcoin was the original app chain. It says, hey, let's build a generalized thing that people can build other applications on top of it, including the original money application, but we can build more on top of that as well. I think the best way to conceptually understand Urbit is it takes something like Secure Scuttlebutt and says, hey, this is an interesting decentralized data structure for a specific application. But what if instead we put generalized VMs on top of it? So that way you can, build this many different applications using this peer-to-peer DAG network. So if you want to build a new decentralized social network, if you want to build a decentralized chat app, if you want to build a decentralized Google Docs competitor, you want to build, a decentralized gaming infrastructure, like you can do this using same way that Ethereum made it so you don't have to build new blockchains for every single use case. Urbit says, hey, you don't have to build new decentralized networks for every single use case. We can build one decentralized peer-to-peer application network, and then people can deploy applications on top of it.
So essentially, to wrap it up a little bit here, so essentially the idea is to have a DAG style system where communication is enabled via gossiping. So to stick to the social media comparison, it's like having a gigantic Facebook group where you are with a couple of friends and you rely on the principle that eventually at some point your photo or message will be forwarded by one of your friends to another friend, to another friend, to a family member, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So, and then this is like from Scuttlebutt, that's like the one main chain, the first chain, the standard chain, and then Orbit comes ahead and says, hey, let's, enable more applications on top of that, not only social media, but messaging, tools, services. Is this the right conclusion?
Yeah, I think that's the right conceptual framework for it. Now, if you tell this framework to Urbit people, they'll get upset because actually Urbit's been in development for far longer. It's much older. So chronologically, my story isn't accurate because Urbit's actually been in development for like over 20 years. Secure Scuttlebutt's only been around for like 10 years, I think. So it's not like Urbit literally looked at Secure Scuttlebutt and said that, but it's a nice analogy to see like, oh, Ethereum is Bitcoin as Urbit is to Secure Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, and we will talk about the history in a couple of moments. But you also said that you have an explanation for people who are in Cosmos that might find it easier to, learn about Urbit or understand Urbit with another analogy much quicker.
Yeah, I think another way of thinking about it is Urbit works as, imagine everyone has a personal blockchain, a personal CosmWasm blockchain. So I have Sunny chain, you have Yuri chain, and they all can be connected via IBC with each other. And in order to deploy, and so instead of having a single chain, if I want to deploy a messaging app, but that me and you can use to talk to each other, what I'll do is I'll publish the code for the messaging app, CosmWasm code, and I install I deploy that Cosmosm contract on my chain, and you deploy it on your chain. And when we want to send messages to each other, we send it over IBC. So I say, hey, Yuri, and then it sends it. I make that transaction on my chain. Then it takes an IBC message, sends it to your contract, and then you could read it from your chain. And then, we want to get a third person involved with our, we want to get John involved, right? He can install that app on his blockchain, and now we can create like a group chat that, every time I want to send a message to both of you, it just sends an IBC packet to both of your chains. So it's like, obviously you can't build every application in this architecture. Like a DEX would not work in this architecture, right? But a messaging app can.
Yeah, I think actually I find this analogy much easier to understand. I think if you ignore the different IBC channels and that you need like a client on every chain, I think that makes sense if we ignore like some details. But from a very high level, this makes a lot of sense. But maybe also to get like a better overview. So I think we're getting closer to the point where we understand the elementary concept of Urbit, that it's like rethinking how we communicate generally on the internet, that we try to remove the middleman, that we try to remove centralizing forces. And then we can build various applications on top of it. So I think we're getting into the right direction. But let's do a quick history lesson. You mentioned Urbit is much older than 20 years old. So not so it's I think it's almost the same age as Bitcoin and blockchain generally. So it's like not too far away from each other. So can you talk a little bit about how Urbit, got invented, who invented it, what was the first Urbit community like, how did they react to the blockchain developments, were there synergies? I mean, obviously today there are. So yeah, maybe to get like an overview of the history and where we are today.
Yeah, sure. So the history of Urbit is, a very contentious one, because it was founded, like I said, about close to almost 20 years ago, by this guy named Curtis Yarvin. He is a computer scientist. But what he's more well known for, even more so than Urbit, is his political writings. He used to write under a pseudonym called Mencius Moldbug. And he is, one of the leaders of what's termed the neo-reactionary movement, which is a very, relatively pretty fringe right-wing like movement that's like considered a lot of like some of the bases for some of the alt-right, but basically like it's like a very monarchist. He's like straight up monarchist, basically. Without going too deep into like the actual like political things, I think he has some interesting points. I think some points just don't make any sense to me. But but yeah, because of that, he's like a very controversial like figure in the political realm. But like, he was writing political work was under a Moldbug name. Then, Urbit was just this like side project that he was doing as Curtis Yarvin. Eventually, he got leaked or something that, hey, it's the same person. And that caused a lot more like contention and infighting, or like that caused a lot more, drama around Urbit, even though Urbit is like pretty distinct from, you could see that there's components of his political philosophy that kind of bleed their way into Urbit's architecture, which I think is always the case, right? I think like all crypto or decentralization projects or like always like have some reflection of the political ideologies of like the creators. So, there's always sprinklings of like the political ideology that leak into the architecture. And so Urbit takes a very hierarchical view to like how the system works. So they have this like, we call it it's almost like a semi-feudal system where you have this concept of galaxies and then stars and planets. It's funny, actually, if you read the old Urbit code, like they were actually, before they were called that, they were actually like kings and dukes and earls or something like that. So it actually, I think he changed the name to like away from the feudal stuff to be like something more futuristic seeming. But yeah, so the Urbit community kind of grew. They were originally very anti-blockchain for a long time. Like they kind of saw like, oh, blockchains are so unnecessary, or like very anti non-Bitcoin, at least. Like they didn't see a need for Urbit, for blockchain in Urbit. They're like, yeah, hey, Bitcoin is useful and cool, and like, or blockchains are cool, but like, that's a completely distinct technology. Like we don't need blockchains for Urbit at all. And so they were kind of very resistant to it. The Eventually then they kind of gave in, and so Urbit also has an ID system. So you call these your Urbit identities, which are honestly the easiest way to explain it to a blockchain person is it's like ENS. It's like, oh, here you get a nice name for your account. The difference between Urbit IDs and ENS is that Urbit put some scarcity on them. So ENS, they can be as many ENS names as we want, right? As long as there's, it can be any combination of characters, right? That hasn't been taken. You can go mint that ENS name. Urbit, they actually said, hey, we're going to have a limited number of Urbit IDs. So that, they put scarcity on it at that level. All projects want some level of scarcity to provide value. Instead of creating a token, Urbit did it via identities. So yeah, that's what they have scarcity. And so what they eventually gave in was, originally they were managing all the Urbit IDs on a GitHub file. And like, so back when I first got involved with Urbit, it was one of my friends, Keaton Dunsford at Berkeley. He started working on the project and, got me interested. And I was always telling like, you guys need a blockchain to manage these like IDs. Like, how are you? And like, Curtis's like response always was like, oh, you don't need, he's like, blockchains are for fast finality. Remember, the analogy I was giving at the beginning, for coming to consensus on stuff quickly. And he's like, the selling of Urbit IDs should be like as rare as like how you sell homes. He's like, oh, treat these as land or real estate. The Urbit community loves this analogy. They love to compare Urbit IDs to land. And so they're like, oh, land, when you transfer and buy and sell land, it should be such a infrequent thing that we don't need to come to consensus quickly. We'll just let social consensus have a way to do that. And I think they were kind of proven wrong about that. They eventually moved the entire ID system onto Ethereum. So now the Urbit ID system is managed on Ethereum blockchain, but the rest of the architecture doesn't make use of blockchains at all.
Yeah, and to be very fair, this was really when I lost the plot. So I remember the first time I explored Urbit was with Chorus One, with a good friend of mine, Xavier, in Milan, and he said, yeah, let's check out this keynote by Urbit at ETH Milan. And I kind of understood the concept, but then when they introduced what you mentioned, the planets, the galaxies, the stars, I completely lost the plot, because for me, obviously also Urbit thrives for mass adoption, and my identity in the internet, like in the Web 2 internet on Google, is my Google address. With my Google address, I open my account, I manage my emails, and so on and so forth. It's like my identity. But if we now go ahead and say, okay, those identities are limited, so let's pretend email addresses are limited, then we are running into the problem that this is, that we have an ending resource that shouldn't end at all. Because imagine if we would just have like a million email addresses, that would, freak out the entire world. So, what is like precisely the idea behind that? If we make the identity on Urbit like kind of, limited, or I think we will also talk about it in a sec.
Yeah.
How can I join Urbit is another way than buying an NFT.
Yeah. So this is definitely a tricky, Urbit has a lot of portions to it, right? There's like the idea of like the vision of this like decentralized web system. There's the architecture. There's a technology behind it. And then there's this like ID. There's the specific network, right? So you could say like, oh, I'm, as an analogy, you could be like, say, hey, the EVM is a great technology, but I don't like Ethereum's tokenomics, right? And so, so far what I've been talking about, is mostly been like, oh, like Urbit as like, oh, this EVM kind of thing, right? And so here's this like system. Now, okay, the actual tokenomics, now once again, it's not tokenomics, if they're not tokens, they did it as the IDs thing. Yeah, I agree that I'm a little bit skeptical about it, in the sense that like, so they have, so there's 3 levels, like I mentioned, galaxies, stars, planets. There's 256 galaxies. There's like 69,000 something planets and about 4 billion stars. Now let's look at the stars for a second, because that's what they expect normal people to have. You'll notice that there's a bit of an issue. There's like, well, if there's only 4 billion planets, but there's like 8 billion people in the world, so it's like there's not even enough for one for everyone. So that's like, I think that it's kind of silly that you're like literally like cutting your, if you want to build the next internet, but you're saying, oh, I want to cap the number of people that are on this internet. I think it's a little bit silly. The whole stars and galaxies, this, once again, I think is just coming from the Curtis's political ideologies, where he's like, oh, okay, we need to have some sort of hierarchical feudal-esque system where the people who, like the galaxy holders, will be responsible for like onboarding everyone else, right? So it's like, oh, the galaxy holders will like find good people in the community who will be good at onboarding, like finding, community leaders. And so, galaxy owners are like the ultimate owners of the system. Then they find stars holders, give them stars, and say, okay, it's your job to go find planets and find people to buy planets. So like they kind of use this like top-down system for how to onboard people into the network. I agree. I think at some point it's going to hit limits when you cap it. But the idea that they have is that they're saying that, okay, one way you can think of it is that you actually can technically use Urbit without having an ID. It's just you're not going to be able to like, okay, here's an analogy actually. Twitter verified, right? So you know how like Elon is basically, anyone can create a Twitter account, but he's basically like making it so like, oh, you have to like pay that $8 a month to get verified. And then like, we're going to have a version of you can see the version of your news feed only from verified people, right? And this is meant to like deal with bots and spam and all this kind of stuff, right? I think Urbit is saying has the same kind of approach, where it's like technically anyone can use Urbit without needing a ID, right? These are actually called Comets. So you can have a version of the chain that if you don't have an ID, you can have a comet, which is not a planet, but you're not actually and if you're running Urbit, you can see the messages from Comets, but they're going to show up in like a different feed. They're not going to show up, you're going to have one version that's like the verified version, which is coming from people that actually have planets. And the idea is that because planets have economic value, they cost money, that it acts like a good spam filter versus, and so that's the trade-off here. It's like, okay, with email or something, you can build open systems, but you're going to have to deal with spam, or you have to build closed systems or something that costs money, and then you can like have a spam filter basically.
Okay, so we have comets, stars, galaxies, planets. Planets are the most valuable ones or the rarest one, right? Galaxies are
the rarest one.
Okay. Galaxies are the rarest one. Second rarest one are planets, then stars, and comets are
Galaxies
essentially endless.
Galaxies are at the top because they're the biggest. Stars are the middle. Planets are the smallest.
Okay.
And then comets are just this like, you're this like external thing that's not part of this hierarchy at all. You didn't even buy anything. So yeah, there's infinite comets.
Infinite comets. Okay. Yeah, I totally understand this Twitter analogy where you basically say, okay, everyone can join Twitter like endlessly. And then you have like the premium version, like the golden check mark for, you know, big projects. I think Osmosis could get like such a golden check mark now. Then like
Yeah.
for people who want to make sure that their Twitter profile does not get copied, they use the blue one. And if you are really the end boss, like the president of the United States, then you have like the gray one, and all the others, they don't have a check mark at all.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, at the end of the day, there is no limit, neither for the blue ones, nor for the gold ones, nor for the gray ones, theoretically. I mean, cool that there's no limits for the Comet ones, but for me, it also reminds me a lot of, you know, how internet companies work, because essentially most people use Google at the end of the day to interact with the internet in what way whatsoever. So I think it's like an early adopter reward, where like people who, you know, buy a share of Google, the company, would get like, I don't know, extra benefits
Yeah.
when using Google. I know Google Plus for free, or I don't know what. So it reminds me a little bit more of that, actually.
Yeah. Like I said, I will admit I'm not the biggest bull on the actual tokenomics of the Urbit network. I think the ideas are extremely interesting. The like vision is very compelling. I think that, you know, if you could redo the tokenomics today, you probably would.
Yeah, but can we like touch base once again, like on these different NFTs? So what precisely is now the difference between a planet, a galaxy, stars, like comets? Okay, just to join the network, you can get yourself a comet to get started, but what does it help me to have a galaxy and not only a planet? Why am I worth more in the network?
Right now, there is no reason. That's one of the like weird thing. Oh, right now the only reason is the length of your name changes. So if you have a galaxy, your name is only 3 characters long. So it could be like Zod or Mar, or like you have a 3-character name. If you have a star, you get a 6-character name. So it's like Marzod, it could be your name or something like that. If you're a planet, you get a 12-character long name. So, or or they do it off of syllables. So you have like each syllable is 3 letters, and so it's like, okay. So for example, I only have a planet. I don't have anything else, and so my name is Ripled Lignup. So it's like, okay, those are 4 syllables. But if I wanted a shorter name, I could buy a star. What also happens is how the network was created was there's a star out there named Ripled, and it owns all of the planet. It has an allocation of about 70,000 planets. So when you buy what's called a full star, you also buy all the planets, and you get the right to sell 70,000 planets to someone else. Once you've sold that, you still own the star, but like it's called a naked star because you don't have any more planets attached to it. Now, at that point, yeah, it's like I don't know what the difference between a star and a planet really is, other than the size of your name. But
Okay.
this is one of the things the community is trying to figure out is how do we provide more utility to the higher tiered stuff.
Okay, and say I like this idea now, I want to get involved in Urbit. So actually, Brian from Chorus One told me at Urbit Summit to go to this one website. I will also link it in the description below, where you can just put in your email, and then magically you're part of Urbit. Did I just get onboarded as a comet in that sense, if I just do the email part, or what was happening when I just, you know, joined with the email? So what is like the go-to action plan to just join?
Yeah, I think so Chorus One has a product called Red Horizon, which I think they use to onboard people. I assume they're probably just onboarding people onto Comets. It's possible maybe they are giving you a free planet just like as an onboarding thing, because planets aren't worth that much. I think planets are worth like $3 or something like that. So it's pretty cheap. And so maybe they might just be giving away free planets right now as an onboarding strategy.
Okay. And but let's say from another perspective, what is now the advantage of holding something like this at all to be active in the Urbit ecosystem? Are there some services I can just use, because we talked about this briefly? Like, is there like, I mean, maybe that's a good starting point to talk about the Urbit ecosystem and what services it offers. Like, are there services that are just allowed for people to hold a planet or a star
Yeah,
or a
almost
galaxy even?
every service requires at least a planet. There's very few services that I think you can use as a Comet because, like I said, it's a spam issue, right? If you let anyone just create infinite comments and start using these applications, your applications are basically just going to be filled with spam. So I would say like the vast majority of applications I've seen on Urbit require a planet at least. So now the question, will that change in the future? Maybe, right? Like if Urbit shifts away from this and like says, hey, what's interesting I've always noticed is someone can build an alternative like network to Urbit, but using the same stack, the same technology, the same way that people like, but it's even more. It's a little bit different. Like I was gonna say, like, oh, it's how people like fork the EVM to build new network, but I would say it's almost even a little bit different because like here it's still. Oh, okay. Here's an example. You can build a Cosmos chain without being part of the Atom economic zone, right? You could like Cosmos. You can say, hey, I love this technology, but this whole Atom aligned system, I don't care about that. I want to go build my own Cosmos chain, but I can still use IBC between these two things, right? I think there might be a world where people go build alternative networks and stuff, still using Urbit stack, still using the same messaging protocol, still interoperable, but saying, oh, your ID system is stupid, I'm going to build a new ID system. I think that's very possible. To your point now, what kind of applications are there right now? I would say a lot of them are mostly messaging apps and like chat rooms. A lot of chat rooms on different sorts of things. One of them that I really like, probably my favorite application that I use to show people to just get that wow moment for them, is it's an application called Realm, REALM, where it's a shared desktop OS. So what that means is, so you know how like Google Docs is like, hey, here's a Word document and everyone can be typing on it together. Realm is like an entire desktop, like a OS that everyone can work on together. So like you have one shared desktop and everyone, let's say you and I and John are all on it. We have like 3 different cursors and we're all like able to move things at the same time. It's like, it's really cool because it's like you try it and it's like, whoa, this is like we're all sharing a computer. That's really cool. So I think that was probably the application that I like, or a very unique application that like is just very cool. And there's other ones as well. There's what do you call it? There's like poker games and like anything that can be done as like peer-to-peer stuff. Another cool use case actually is for, you can use it to like so we actually do have an Osmosis app on Urbit right now. So like I said, this app, it's basically a something you can install onto your Urbit machine. So that interacts with the Osmosis blockchain.
Cool. Yeah, I think it gets more clear now. Like all what we have discussed in the beginning until now. So essentially, you have this. Can you call it an ecosystem actually, or is this a wrong term?
No,
I mean, is the internet an ecosystem? Okay, an ecosystem. So we have this.
I feel now the internet is so big, it's like calling ecosystem weird. But yeah, I think in the early days, if you could probably say, oh yeah, the internet ecosystem.
Okay, so as of now, for now, we call it like an ecosystem. So the Urbit ecosystem, there are like some applications, chat rooms, shared desktop, essentially everything what can be done peer-to-peer. And the pitch is, okay, you don't need like a server in between. Like all of the applications you use in Urbit are permissionless, peer-to-peer, no intermediary included. And to get started, you need to get at least a planet for around $3, or let's have like at another point a closer look at Chorus One's application, where they maybe like also give out planets for free. But now the question is like, why? And I think like now we're getting more to this question: what are the bottlenecks, for mass adoption? Because like obviously we are in crypto, and for us, decentralization, removing intermediaries makes sense and is very interesting. And I think in the terms of, and in the case of blockchains, there are also a lot of advantages that can be applied, like faster transactions, a more open internet. As soon as people can open a bank account, like creating an email address. So there are so many benefits in terms of crypto. What is like the pitch for Urbit? Because even if you have like no money at all, like most likely you can also open a Google account for free. You can access the internet. So Urbit is like really interesting for people who really care about privacy. But if you just go through your Instagram feed, you will see that the majority of people, especially my generation, your generation, they do not care that much about privacy, owning your data, or not giving away too much data. So can you talk a little bit more about those bottlenecks, and if you see this as like one of the bottlenecks that, Urbit's pitch is actually very good, very nice, but that there is a future where people just don't care?
Yeah. Honestly, I think you're kind of spot on. I think ideologically, Urbit makes a lot of sense, but like, will most users actually care about that? I'm not sure. I think the biggest thing that I actually disagree that I think a lot of people do at least nominally care about like data privacy. And I think the biggest thing here is I think it might just get bigger and bigger with AI, that as AI like is, the more data you give away to these companies, they can like just better and better model you, and like create like they can use your data to like create artificial versions of you that can be used to scam or do all sorts of things, right? And like I think in a world of AI, data privacy just becomes more and more important. And I think as we start to see more nefarious uses of AI technology, I think that will maybe potentially cause the general public to be more and more conscious of data privacy. Just at the, I think there's a lot of things today that we are very, I think a lot of people care a lot about financial privacy, right? They would not be very happy with like anyone having access to their financial data. And I think it's going to be a similar thing. This is just my hypothesis, right? Is this how society is going to play out? I don't know, but I think that is like probably if I had to bet on why data privacy will become more important, it will probably be because of that.
Yeah, I totally agree on this actually, because the more I think about, that's also a pitch for blockchain, because AI completely has overtaken it right now. And I think it's the same for source codes. So I think especially like blockchain comes in to verify data and the origin of data. So this is where the blockchain aspect comes into play, and to not end up that AI completely imitates us and controls us. I think like Urbit could come into play to really, make sure that AI does not know everything from us, which is like on the internet, since the internet can be decentralized in that way. So I totally see the pitch here actually. But since we now talk about, blockchain, AI, I remember one keynote that you have held at the Urbit Summit 2023 in Lisbon, which was about the idea that Urbit could own or could have its own blockchain. And also to reflect on that, you mentioned in the very beginning that you were the first one who said, okay, you can't just give out planets and galaxies via a file on Reddit. You need a blockchain for that. So you have been one of the first advocates to talk about, okay, we need some blockchain aspects here. So can you talk a little bit more about your keynote and in the context of the Cosmos SDK that you have essentially pitched?
Yeah. So there was a couple of goals here, right? So one is like, I respect what Urbit's trying to do, but I do think that there are portions of the stack that need a blockchain, and they came around to that as well, right? They put the name service on Ethereum, but I think you know, like I mentioned, Urbit very focused on just purely peer-to-peer applications, which I think is actually pretty limited on the types of applications you can build, right? Yes, I can build my messaging app, but like I mentioned, there's a poker app on there, but it's actually kind of centralized because you need to trust one of the people in the game to be the dealer. But if you actually had a like blockchain, you could actually get rid of some of the like trust things. And like, or another big one is like finding applications on Urbit is extremely weird. Like what you kind of have to just know where to find it. There's no equivalent to like a search engine or there's these like centralized registries where you have to know how to find the registry, and then like they have a list of, oh, here's all these applications. But it's like, oh, now you built the discovery of new applications in a centralized way, and now what if those just start censoring applications, right? Like it would be nice if the app registry also existed in a decentralized way on a blockchain or something like that. The point is that you are restricting the type of applications you can build if you're only doing everything in a purely peer-to-peer way. If you combine, now I think that a lot of things in crypto and blockchain world, too much data is put on chain. It's just very bad for scalability, right? You want more of that data to not go on chain, and anything that can be done peer-to-peer should be done peer-to-peer. Now, my take is that like, okay, Urbit should be, people who design Urbit applications should be incorporating blockchain aspects into them. And, you know, I think people are starting to. Like I said, that's what we did with our Osmosis app on Urbit, was like, you know, yeah, it's on Urbit, but it's still talking to the Osmosis blockchain. So I think this is inevitable. Anyone who's building peer-to-peer apps, you're going to want a combination of blockchain and peer-to-peer components. Why should Urbit build its own blockchain? Now, that's a more interesting question. One is, so one thing I didn't mention is one of the things, Urbit uses a very, very custom stack. So this is actually another one of the things I'm not super bullish on about Urbit, like where they are functional programming maxis. They built their own custom VM and everything. It's not the most easy for a new developer to just jump in. There's always been a meme in like Urbit communities like, oh, let's just rewrite all of this in Rust and like make it so easy for people. Actually, that's what Abstract is doing. So if you guys know the Abstract team in Cosmos, like you can think they're like actually doing a lot of the Urbit vision, but they're trying to do it all in like Cosmosm basically, instead of using this very like weird stack. But anyways, so the thing is the Urbit community loves their weird tech stack. And so so my point to them was like, hey, if you guys like your custom VM so much, wouldn't it be nice if you had a blockchain that also was running the same VM? So if you're building a application that's peer-to-peer and blockchain based, right? Instead of having to write in Solidity or something for the blockchain component and then your custom stack for the peer-to-peer component, you should just use the same language to write the whole application end to end. This is like, you know, why Node.js became so popular in web services, right? Like Node.js was, you know, the client side code in web apps was always written in JavaScript, but then before that, you should have to write the server in like Go or Python or something like that, right? But Node.js became popular because like, oh, I can use JavaScript for both my front end and back end. So that's the pitch to Urbit. It's like, hey, make a blockchain that uses the same stack. So your app developers can write the same language for front end, which is the Urbit side, and the back end, which is the blockchain side. So that's one of the use cases. The other was, I think it's a way of providing more utility to the address space. So, you know, I think these IDs have, like, you know, as you mentioned, I don't think they have a lot of intrinsic value right now. And I think they're very easily forkable. I think it's very possible for someone to build competing ID space to Urbit right now. This will, if you can build more utility to the current address space, ID space, that will make it more sticky. why do I care about that? I mean, I'm not a big address space holder. Like I told you, I only have one planet. I mostly care of it from an economic experiment. I like crypto economic experiments. And I think the Urbit ID space provides a lot of interesting opportunity for like new mechanism designs, because you're put into this like constrained space. Most blockchains today have a token, right? And you can use that token for proof of stake, or you can use it for rewards, or you can use it for like fees. What I find exciting about Urbit is because there is no money token, they only have this NFT thing. It's like, okay, how would I design a blockchain with NFTs? Okay, how do I pay fees in this kind of blockchain? How do I do proof of stake in this kind of blockchain? Like, to me, it's just a very exciting mechanism design opportunity, and that's kind of why I got really excited about the problem.
Yeah, and also I think it makes a lot of sense, because right now all of this is deployed on Ethereum, and since Urbit is all about independence and stuff like this, I think it makes sense for Urbit to also have its own blockchain and not rely entirely on Ethereum, even though I'm a big Ethereum fan.
Exactly. It's like you're trying to build a sovereign like system, right? Like you should. It's kind of silly that the first step to onboarding onto Urbit is go make an Ethereum account and buy an Urbit ID, right? It's like this should all be like vertically integrated. I should just be able to onboard onto Urbit directly, and so I think that's another big component of it.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, now that we talked so much about Urbit, and as we get to the end of this interview, maybe let's talk exactly about this, how to onboard people, how to get started. So for people who say, okay, I found this conversation super interesting, I want to get started, what are some call to action plans? So obviously, I guess like buying a planet, but yeah, maybe if you could map out how to get started in Urbit, with creating an ID, finding all of the Urbit DApps, how to join the community, things like that.
Yeah, I would say my recommendation would be to go try Realm. I think it's probably like the best beginner app that like I think works like give you that wow moment of that like shared desktop OS. The same company Holium that builds Realm, they're also building a messaging app where like it's a group messenger app that like but like along with having this like peer-to-peer messaging happening on Urbit, they also like let you have a DAO on Ethereum at the same time. So it's like your group chat can also like own NFTs together and stuff on Ethereum. So I think that's another really cool app you can try out. So I think those are probably the two that I would recommend trying out.
And last question, is there like really something like an Explorer where you can access all of these DApps? You said there isn't one, but do I ironically need to Google those applications, or where do I start?
Yeah. So no, when you like go on to or like if you use Red Horizon, so what'll happen is like there's different people who kind of maintain app stores, you can call it, right? So Realm, like when you download Realm, it has its own little app store built in. But then if you go to like Course One site, they have their own registry of apps. So you can you can just go to the Urbit website and they have a list of apps there as well. That's what I'm saying. It's like this like whole like set, because it's so centralized, or the app registry, it causes this like divergence where it's like, oh, Course One maintains their own version, they maintain their own version, and it causes this fragmentation. That's why I think it's like, oh, let's put this all on a blockchain so it's like globally discoverable.
Okay, yeah, I mean, here we have another reason why I think for Urbit having its own blockchain would make a lot of sense. But yeah, I think we have enough starting points for people who are interested. And as always, you can find all of the mentioned links in the description below. And with that being said, Sunny, thank you so much for shedding light on the Urbit ecosystem as of now. Let's hope that we don't have to call it an ecosystem in a couple of years from now, but just Urbit, like we say internet. I think that would be a lovely outcome. We at Friends will have a very close eye on Urbit and try to cover this, again, ecosystem as much as possible in the next coming weeks. And yeah, once again, thank you, Sunny, and I hope I will see you on the show very, very soon.
Awesome. Thank you.